So can you introduce yourself?
I'm Rob Quarles.
Okay. What degrees in higher education do you currently possess?
So all of my graduate work, all my PhD work is in either applied physiology or it's in ecology, mainly coastal ecosystems. And so those are my two big areas. I left anatomy and physiology or applied physiology and went more into ecology. So my research interest changed once I was working on my PhD. My bachelor's degree is in liberal arts.
Um, so how did you decide to study biology and later on ecology?
Uh, well, like I was saying, my bachelor's degree was in liberal arts, and so my major was actually recreation administration. So I was majoring in playing. And so that was a pretty good undergrad, but when you get a degree and you go out into the working world, they don't pay you to play. I didn't figure that out until I went out and got a job in a recreation department. And so how I got in biology was I went back to get certified to teach. And the easiest degree for me to get in teaching was in biology because I already had all the hours I needed. I didn't need to take any more classes. And so I took a lot of that as an undergrad, mainly because I was interested in coaching and exercise physiology and applied physiology from that standpoint. So it was really easy for me to get a biology degree. It was a little bit harder to get an English or social studies or math degree, but bio was pretty easy for me to get to teach that. So that's how I got into it. Originally, I got into biology. My interest in biology really was at the high school level. And so teachers back then, I graduated from high school in the 70s, and there was a whole get out into the land and ecology kind of thing. I remember the first Earth Day and all that stuff. So
Awesome.
that's how I got started.
Okay, so what is your current job position and can you explain what you do?
So I am the AP Sciences lead for the school district. I teach AP Biology and AP Environmental Science, and I also facilitate all of the AP courses: physics, chemistry, environmental science, biology, and all the different physics courses across the district, and facilitate the work of teachers across the district. So that's a big part of what I do, in addition to teaching AP Environmental Science and AP Biology.
So how do you like teaching students in subjects of AP Bio and APES?
Well, that's what I really like is the students. I have a lot of autonomy here, and so I nobody really is has their thumb on me as far as my research. I can research what I want to as long as I don't do anything that's dangerous for the kids and stuff. And I get to I really like teaching high school kids because I kind of get to influence them and influence their decision with regard to science before they become jaded and before they become not interested in that field anymore. So I kind of get them while they're young and fresh and haven't developed preconceived ideas about what science is.
What is your favorite part of your current job and why is it your favorite part?
Definitely the students. I was a principal for a while, and I knew after 3 days, I was a principal for 4 years, and I knew the first 3 days I needed to get back to the classroom, but I committed to certain goals. And so we reached those goals, and I immediately went back to the classroom like the next day. And so really it's the students that make it all worthwhile. A lot of AP courses and a lot of AP teachers teach it as a test prep course, and that's what it's all about is test prep. And really to me it's more about the laboratory experiences and having a college type experience. If I give them that kind of experience, they'll be fine on the exam. And if they're not fine on the exam, they'll take the course again in college and make an A or a B in the course, and that's good too.
Yeah. So what research are you currently doing or have done in the past?
Well, my initial graduate research was on exercise physiology. It was on carbohydrate and lipid metabolism. That's where I started. And I was interested in the impacts of different environmental factors on how humans metabolize carbohydrates and fats. And so that's what I was mainly interested in, and interested in human performance at that time. And it kind of moved into ecology from there. Mainly I'm interested in ecology. I've in the past been interested in nutrient load and the influence of hurricanes and tropical storms on the nitrate, nitrogen, and phosphate, phosphorus that are in the bays and estuaries. So that's mainly what I've been interested in, is how that inland surge of fresh water from the storm will then flood back at the coast. So it'll be kind of like a backwash to the coast. And if we're using a lot of nitrates and phosphates in our agricultural fields, it kind of impacts the species that are estuarine or bay species. And so that's kind of an important thing to me historically. My recent research, I've been going more into the canyons in the Southwest. So I've been in Zion Canyon up in Utah and Arizona, the Grand Canyon. And I'm kind of interested in what the tropical storms from the other way. I'm kind of interested in what happens with El Nino years and how that could impact nutrient load in those bodies of water in the West.
What has your research involved that is related in your undergraduate degrees?
Nothing's related to my undergraduate degree. My undergraduate degree was in playing.
Or your other
And
degree,
so,
yeah.
with regard to undergrad, I guess it kind of is, because I focused in outdoor education. So a lot of what we do is field work, and so I do try to teach kids camping skills and field skills and things like that, so that when we go out in the field, they're not endangering themselves or others in the way they build fires or camp or anything like that. So I guess that's kind of an important thing, and then. Kind of leave no trace ethic when we're in the field. We don't want to change the field. You want to go into the field and you want to observe in the field and you want to do your work and your research in the field, but you don't want to be contributing to a change in the ecosystem just through your work. You want to be an observer in your work.
What additional knowledge or skills do you need to use in order for you to carry out your research?
Oh, wow. So really, for my entire life, it's been about constructing content knowledge, and content knowledge has changed. So back when I first started doing a lot of field work with species, that was before the Genome Project. That was before we looked at DNA. We looked at Linnaean classification. And so we're looking at morphology of the different organisms. We're not looking at their DNA. And so it totally changes the cladograms or the phylogenetic trees when you start looking at DNA. So keeping up with current research, keeping up with current research techniques, keeping up with ways where you can extract and isolate the DNA and sequence the DNA, and doing as little damage to the species or the population as possible, not really harming that population in the process. Those are new things. This is going to sound very nerdy to you guys, but actually on Facebook, the best thing on Facebook for me is Methods in Ecology and Evolution. I follow their page and they post research articles every month. And so I stay on top of research articles that way, stay on top of my research organizations. And so I'm part of the Society for Ecological Restoration and the Ecological Society of America, and I stay on top of the readings. You got to read all the time. It's not always in a book or in a journal. Sometimes those are digital. And so you read your abstracts in digital format, and you just have to stay on top of your content knowledge and keep building it, because it changes. You would think biology doesn't really change. It's all about memorizing words and memorizing Latin roots and stuff like that. But for my generation, everything now has changed. It's at a cellular and subcellular and molecular level, and math has become a big, huge part of biology, which when I was going through my PhD program, not so much. It was just knowing the statistics for your research, and that was it. So just staying on top of it, keep reading, keep doing. Keep being involved in outreach, keep talking to other people about biology and about sciences. Hang out with other scientists. The nerd herd is cool.
What do you find most challenging in your research or in your career?
I've got a pretty good gig, actually. So there's not much challenging to what I do. I think a lot of teachers find administrators challenging, and just kind of that mindset of administration. That's kind of challenging in some ways. Not so much for me, because I've been around long enough, and I can be vocal in the things that I want to be vocal about. we have swerved really hard towards testing, and that's kind of a difficult thing for me because um, meeting with professors at the university from time to time, that's one of the big concerns is we're producing a generation of kids that are really good at making a 70 on a multiple choice exam, but they're not as good at free response and they're not as good at laboratory techniques. They're really good at taking tests because you guys are all pretty young as far as your career goes. So you probably remember in high school and every day it's about the test. This is what's coming up on the test. It's always about the test. And so that's the most challenging thing is dealing with people that think that's the most important thing. And it's not. And convincing them that the most important thing is the college experience and getting kids a good experience in science, not getting them a test score.
So do you have other activities or positions in which you have to use your knowledge from biology or ecology?
Sure. So my main gig, of course, is teaching here, but over the years I've been a program coordinator at the Environmental Science Institute at UT. I've had different graduate assistantship things, coaching, just coaching, knowing the science of the human body and how it works, and so training swimmers that you have to be knowledgeable about physiology, at least to a certain degree. I may be more knowledgeable than most coaches at that, but I coached for 32 years, and so that was kind of an important thing. To me, you use biology every day. I'm climbing Guadalupe Peak this weekend and doing several hikes out in Guadalupe Mountains, and just knowing what I'm getting into and knowing about altitude and what impacts that has on my body. And I'm older, and so recovering from that is a little bit harder than it was when I was your age. Those kinds of things, knowing the species that I'm going to run into and how to deal with those species, how to protect those species. One of my big things is these biological soils in the desert that they just look like kind of crusty soil, and I think a lot of people just think that that's crumbly soil and you stomp all over it, but that may have taken decades to grow to that point, and that's biological soil. They're living things there, and you're destroying 30 years of their evolution and 30 years of their growth and 30 years of their population by stepping off the trail. So knowing where you're going, what you're doing, and how the world works, it's just really cool, and so you use it all the time.
So can you tell us a little bit about the restoration projects that you have participated in?
Restoration projects. So one of my huge focus points here in Texas is the Texas Blackland Prairie, and when Columbus got lost and ran into North America, there was 12 million acres of Blackland Prairie, and since then, in post-Columbian times, we're down to 5,000 acres of Blackland Prairie. So it's probably the most endangered ecosystem in the entire state right now. Most of it is under plow, so it's been grazed and converted to farmland and stuff. It's not native prairie anymore. And there's a great deal of habitat loss there and migration corridors that are lost through that for different species. What I've been doing for a long time has to do with water quality in the Blackland Prairie, tracing a drop of water from the hill country to the Gulf of Mexico. Those are some of the projects we've worked on. I've taken students to make seed balls using native prairie plants, and we've reseeded areas of prairie. I told you there was 5,000 acres left. 1,200 of that, it used to extend from Bexar County, north of San Antonio, all the way to the Red River. And now there's 5,000 acres left in that whole area. 1,200 of it is in Travis County, and the largest contiguous tract is a place called the Flieger Meadow, about a mile from here. It's about 100 acres, and that's the biggest tract remaining. Almost all the rest of it is 1 or 2 feet wide, and it goes down along cemetery fence lines and railroad tracks. So going out and building garden beds that are native plants and having little pocket prairies all over the place that are Texas Blackland Prairie native plants, that's actually pretty beneficial. And we've seeded Lake Pflugerville, we've seeded some other areas that are kind of natural areas and around here, the parks and stuff. And so we do a lot of that. That's probably the biggest restoration project I've done other than my own personal yard and things like that. I do a lot of work at the Marine Science Institute in Port Aransas, and so now that Harvey has gone through there, there's some other research I may be doing down there, and there'll be some other restoration down there. Seagrasses, we just started a project down there about seagrasses, so I'm waiting to see what those guys have found, and there may be some seagrass bed restoration projects going on. But that's the nurseries for all of our marine life up in the estuaries.
Can you tell us a little bit about Biohabitats Incorporation?
Oh, wow. So Biohabitats is actually a business so you're talking about Biohabitats Incorporated, the company out of Maryland.
Sorry.
Yeah. And so Biohabitats, that's a company that was founded, I guess, by a biologist many years ago, and they have a lot of civil engineers, and they're involved in a lot of sustainable sites projects. And the biggest thing is the East Coast around Maryland and around Chesapeake Bay. That's probably their biggest area because that's where they started. And I don't know a lot more about them other than just what I see in social media about them. But I do know that they've spread nationwide, and they've got a Southwest office. They do some projects, I know, in Houston and New Mexico and Arizona and Utah. And they do a lot of things with parkland, and they do a lot of things with cities and city planning. So it's not always parkland, sometimes it's just green space. And we have interjected ourselves into the natural biogeochemical cycles, and we influence those cycles. And so a big part of what they do is the movement of water, a lot of hydrology work. So they have a lot of geologists work for them. It seems like those guys are hiring all the time. So when you graduate and you're ready for a job, that's a good place to look. They're always hiring ecologists. The built environment, I was talking to a guy a couple of years ago, and something like, I want to say it was 55% of the built environment, he was telling me, by 2035 is either going to be new or rebuilt. And so if you look at that around the world and look at the money in that, that's where the future is. When I was your age, the future was in computers, and we were all like, nobody's going to have a personal computer. And it's all changed.
Yeah.
So I think the future is really in the built environment, and biomimicry seems to be a pretty big field right now.
What are your goals for the future in your career in research?
To retire. That's my goal. I'm eligible to retire now. I'm going to stay at it for another 8 years or so. I don't have any intention of leaving this. This is a good gig. I basically get this lab, and I'm not supervised. I'm the supervisor, so I get to do the things I want to do. I can do BSL-1 and BSL-2 stuff in here, and I don't really want to I don't even know anybody that does BSL-3, like biosafety level 3 stuff. That's usually defense contractors and those kind of people. I don't think I even know anybody with a BSL-3 lab. But I can do pretty much anything I want to do in here, and do it cleanly and do it well. So I'm probably going to stay here another 8 years and retire. When I retire, I'm going to hike and paddle and just hang out outside.
So you mentioned that you do experiments and stuff in labs. So what exactly?
Yeah, I don't have any active research going on right now. So what I've been interested in the past is nutrient load. And so I think I'm probably this coming summer I'll go back to Utah and go back to Zion Canyon, and I'll try to take, I don't know how familiar you guys are with hanging gardens, but in canyons there's pockets along the wall of a canyon where there's succession going on, primary succession is going on. And so it starts out with mosses and lichens, and they begin to dissolve the mineral there, and then they add organic matter. And so there's constantly water coming into these canyons through little seeps and little cracks and little tributaries into the main rivers. And so Zion Canyon is one of the ones that I'm kind of interested in. My species of interest there is cutthroat trout. And so I'm kind of interested in the contribution of the El Nino rains. So in the desert you have a rainy season that's a really rainy season. Rain falls in feet, not in inches. And then you get long months and months and months where it's desert kind of habitat and you don't get any rainfall for 9 months. And then when you have your rainy season again, you have this huge dump of water into the canyons. And up above the canyons, if they're fertilizing that land with nitrates and phosphates, they're adding the nutrient load to the canyon. And so is that nutrient load, normally that nutrient load contributes to cultural eutrophication in the water. So you end up ultimately with really, really low dissolved oxygen levels in the water. And so cutthroat are an endangered species in that part of the world. They're heavily threatened from lake trout and other trout and stuff, but I'm wondering what the nutrient load impact is on that. And just like hurricanes, during hurricane years where we get heavy rainfall inland from the hurricanes, does El Nino cause the same type of rainfall in the desert to contribute to higher nutrient loads? And we've seen this in lakes in Utah that have been closed in recent years because of eutrophication.
Can you tell us about how ecology is changing and growing in our world today, and how important ecology is in our world?
So I think the built environment is a big part of it. And so I think more and more people are going to head toward having a lighter footprint ecologically. When we talk about ecology, we're normally studying relationship between certain species, and a lot of people will study predator-prey relationships, and they kind of take humans out of the equation historically. They don't think of our impact on those species. And so I think more and more people are beginning to understand we have an impact on all the different biogeochemical cycles. We impact the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the things that we do, human activities impact all these things. I think it is general consensus with regard to climate change. Climate change is deeply impacting biodiversity now. Species habitats are moving to higher altitudes where it's cooler, or they're moving to higher latitudes. So they're moving northward or moving poleward so they may move northward or southward depending on what side of the equator they're on. But I think species are moving, they're migrating, and those that can't migrate, hopefully they can adapt, and if they can't adapt, they're going to go extinct. They're going to become threatened unless we can come up with some sort of solution. I think people are really interested in solutions, and I think people really do understand that climate change is real. The climate is changing. There's no doubt about that occurring. The human impact is huge, and there's some debate, I guess, about how much of climate change is due to humans. But we're not interested really. We're not concerned about natural climate change. We're concerned about anthropogenic climate change. So it's only the human part of it we're concerned about, and humans are responsible for 100% of that part of it. So I think scientists generally can agree on those 2 points. And then I think current climate models also show that the impacts from this are going to be somewhere between a high point and a low point. You can take the generally accepted models, and you know it's going to get at least this bad, because in some places it's already that bad, but scientists know that it can't get worse than this. A lot of people think it's going to get worse and we need to save the planet and everything, but it can't get worse than the high end because there's not that much carbon in the universe. And so to think that there's going to be that much carbon here and it's going to get that bad just because the trend is that way, that's not really understanding the science. It can't get that bad because there's not that much carbon there. But we do know that it's going to fall somewhere between these two generally accepted highs and lows. I think people are beginning to understand that. Where the debate needs to occur is among the decision makers. And decision makers need to have a really true debate about what the right choices are. And there's some valid, I think, arguments on both sides there, but we're not having that debate. We're too busy with people denying what's going on. One side wants to deny it, the other side thinks the planet needs to be saved. And the planet's going to be fine. I think we're going to get uncomfortable. We may head to our own extinction as a species ultimately, but the planet's going to be fine. It's going to recover from us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Judson.
Did that work?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.